Good morning, everyone that is joining us today on a nice Tuesday. Well, well for me it's 9 o'clock or 9:15. Um, so thank you for joining. This is I think it's day 5 of our IG Live series, and today we are talking to Renee Crook, right? And we're going to be talking about all things education and ADHD, but more specifically, what it means to be an educator with ADHD and, the world that we live in the educational system. So sit back and enjoy the ride. But I'm going to have Renee introduce herself if she doesn't mind.
No, yeah, Renee Crook. My business is in private practice as ADHD, as an ADHD coach is Added Perspective Coaching. So that's a spoiler alert of my journey with ADHD that I am in practice online. All of my clients are virtual and on the road currently, but working while traveling. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, but also volunteer my time at the Attention Deficit Disorder Association as a previous board member and chair of the virtual work and support groups, and now working on special events.
Nice. Thank you. We're going to learn a little bit more about that transition as well. So just a little quick intro of myself as well and as it relates to education. And so before becoming an ADHD coach, I had worked with the public educational system for decades, it feels like. So I worked for a public school system here in DC for 12 years, I think, for 12 years. But prior to that, I worked in some education in St. Louis, also worked in education in Rhode Island. And so working in the educational system in some capacity has kind of been the bread and butter of my career for the past 20-ish years. In different roles. So I'm excited to have this conversation about how the educational system combines with having ADHD and how it all kind of connects. Because, within the educational system, we talk a lot about the kids with ADHD, and it's all about the students and how to better support students within the classroom that are experiencing ADHD symptoms and how to navigate that as a teacher. But we're not talking about the massive amounts of educators that are working for the school system that also have ADHD and the challenges that they experience while teaching. So I'm happy to get into this conversation today.
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed experience. So I'm not going to sugarcoat too much of it. There was a lot of rough times and some great times too. So, but yeah. So shall we start at the beginning of the journey with teaching?
Yeah. So I mean, again, yeah, don't sugarcoat, because the reality is like teaching with ADHD is hard.
It is very hard. It's hard without ADHD.
Exactly. Yeah. Teaching without ADHD is extremely hard too, and we do not give enough credit to our educators, and not just people in the classroom, but also the people that are supporting the educational system in a variety of roles. We do not give them credit whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Like, let's just make that statement clear, right?
Team effort.
It is a huge team effort, and like without one piece, the whole system falls apart quickly. And so, but trying to do all that and manage your ADHD is a whole other challenge, not in addition to all of the other teachers and educators that work for the system that don't even know they have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And struggling.
That's how my story began. So that's kind of the biggest challenge for me, was not knowing I had ADHD. I really had always wanted to be a teacher. I felt like I was going to do something with children, something with educating. Thought about school psychology for a while too, because that was fascinating for me. But pretty much had a dream of being an elementary school teacher. My mother was an elementary school teacher. It just felt like the right fit, and that was what I wanted to do for the longest time. So I went to school, got my degree, started to struggle more in school. I mean, never did super, excellent studying, or, all the signs were there. Talking in class and helping my neighbors with their work and answering their questions instead of doing my own work. Things like that in elementary school, and then to high school and college, doing everything at the last minute, overnight, staying up all night trying to finish projects. All the signs were there. But they were missed in a lot of ways, again, because I have an attentive type ADHD, so that generally tends to hide much better, and being pretty smart and being able to math a lot, kind of covered, kind of skated my way through, and did the bare minimum and did fine. Didn't do great, but I did fine. And so then the challenges started to get worse in college, because those are the times when you can't get away with all the things that you can get away with in high school, and had my first D ever in my life, and thought the world was ending. And so it was a rough transition of independence and struggle. But even during that process of going to school to become a teacher, there was no hint at this, no education or training about ADHD. I actually have a psychology degree as well. There was just a tiny chunk of it, and it just is so confounding to me that that's possible, that I could have a teaching degree and a psychology degree and barely have any sense that ADHD was a thing.
Yeah.
And what it looked like, and what it looked like for women, what it looked like for adults. And so that was in the 90s, late 90s, and so there was still a lot of stuff not happening yet. People knew, but it was like, it was little boys, bouncing off the walls in school, and behavior problems in the classroom, and so that's kind of where it showed up for me in my training and education, was really just, how do you deal with behavior problems and interruptions in the classroom? And that's kind of where it stayed. It wasn't, talking about any of the other challenges, executive function or emotional dysregulation. I didn't even know those words for years. So then I graduated, started teaching, got my first job, and loved everything about it, except it took me hours to do everything. So I was, as a new teacher, I thought that was, normal, and there were other teachers who were spending all day and night there, but it wasn't normal. Spending so much time trying to figure out how to get things done and not reinvent the wheel. I have this challenge, which many of us seem to have, of having to do everything brand new and, innovative. Yeah. And I kept being told, just use the curriculum, use what's there. And I was just bored to death with that idea. So I was always trying to innovate, always trying to find new ways of doing things. And that continued throughout my whole career. So that was one of my biggest challenges throughout, was not spending my entire life in the classroom. I was there all night. I was there on the weekends. I was there on holidays. I was planning at home, very little balance.
Yeah.
Which is also a pattern in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you say a couple of things that teachers could be experiencing in the classroom, especially around, one of our strengths is to be creative, and we do have an interest-based focus like brain, right? And so it sounds like, with this curriculum, they were telling you, administrators are telling you, just use the curriculum as it is, and you're looking at it as like with the ADHD lens, and you're saying like, this could be better. There are so many other more things that I could be doing to engage these children. Let me access and tap into the creative part of my brain, which is great, except now you have an issue, because now you're taking more time and like trying to manage your classroom. In addition to being creative, you're taking things home, and then you're at odds a little bit with the administration and like how to navigate those conversations and challenges. But everything inside you was like, I have to make my own.
Yeah. So that was a long challenge that I fought throughout the whole experience of being a teacher. But then things were, I had troubles here and there with just, again, not going so in depth and trying to make sure all of my kids were coming along and not falling behind. And that whole challenge was really difficult for me to manage and move forward. And so this is where my time management sort of came in as a challenge, and planning, because I would plan everything out to the nth degree, and then the day would come, I would teach, and we wouldn't get through what I'd planned. Right. We would spend lots of time doing extra work, and I would go slow, making sure all the kids were along for the ride. And I struggled to let them, to keep moving, to keep moving forward. And so, you know, I had trouble staying on the curriculum, but I had other teachers that were in my grade level. And this is where I think, you know, one of the biggest benefits and things that school districts and teachers can do to support one another is to have the cohort kind of idea of teaching together and having all the other, a team of other teachers that you can work with and plan with, and kind of, so we were all sort of trying to stay on the same pace for our curriculum. And I was a first grade teacher at that time. So when you think about all the topics, you're teaching everything. So every subject area, and we didn't have a great curriculum, a really robust curriculum at that time. We were in the transition in the district of adopting a new one. It had been there forever, and there were a lot of teachers who were just doing their own thing. And that was actually part of why I found it so, it was exciting, but it was also hard because I was creating a bunch of my own curriculum too, to supplement, because there were big gaps. And that was, again, exciting, but then that's where I got carried away, and, you know, planning these elaborate units. So this is where, you know, realistic expectations, you know, magical thinking was coming in a lot too, of like, we can do all these things. And everything was supposed to integrate. You know, we were going to have science and art and math and reading all integrated and linked together, and it was beautiful. And then it's always, again, so stimulating, but for the creative brain, knowing what's enough and when to stop, that was a big challenge for me. So those things, you know, continue to be a challenge throughout my teaching. But I was great with the kids. I connected with them and kind of had a rapport with them that so many people noticed, and talked about my connections with them and their families and the trust and, you know, deep relationships that I could have with the families. It was a little tricky at first being a young teacher with, you know, young parents that, you know, some of them were older than me. When I first started teaching, was a baby teacher right out of college, you know, and so barely legal. I don't even think even legal to drink when I started teaching. I don't even know. But that's pretty young. So anyway, that was hard to do, to build my confidence, like that I belong here. The imposter syndrome of, I've trained for this. This is exactly what I want to do all my life. But do I really belong here? Can I do this? You know, am I doing it right? You know, that's always kind of been a struggle. Anyway, so that was a big part of it. And then as I moved through teaching, I had little problems here and there, again, with timing and keeping up with the curriculum, but, you know, everything was going well, and a pretty tough principal. That was, there's sort of an old guard in the school, and the new guard, and the old teachers were sort of in this cluster of circle of trust with this principal, and then the rest of us were trying to do new and innovative things and bring in our new thinking. There was a lot of resistance, and there was a lot of I don't even know what the right word is, but it was rough. It was rough to kind of earn trust, you know, from them and from her. But they were lovely people. It was just the sort of, the education system has this real sort of closed, like, circle in it. And the us and them of that was really present a lot of, you know, this isn't how we've done it. This is not how things are done. And, you know, and so there's a lot of discomfort and resistance around new ways of doing things. And so that was something I seemed to come up against a lot. New ways, creative ways, different ways, outside the box ways. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that. And I misread that at the time as, you're doing it wrong. Instead of, this feels like the right way, and honoring creativity, and again, didn't know about ADHD. So, you know, that was about, I was teaching first and second grade. I taught by myself. I taught with a partner. I team taught first and second grade multi-age classroom. Teaching with another teacher was amazing. Loved working with her, but the biggest challenge was really trying to, again, plan with her, a different brain than mine. And so that was tricky, and working with other teachers. I don't know, I loved them, and we were friends, and we really connected, but I always sort of felt different from them. I didn't know why, and so that was a big part of it. And I was just always seeking new information. So love of learning, a huge strength of mine. And always learning, always looking for more, always researching, always trying to figure out how things can be better. that was really tricky for me as a person who was in the public education system at the time too. There was huge swings. This is one of the big tension swings of, you know, pedagogy and education around phonics versus whole, you know, more explore whole like reading strategies that were embedded in a the lingo is escaping me at the moment, but there was just this big shift this was one of the big pendulum shifts in education toward a different modality for teaching. Multiple intelligences were coming in and trying to diversify instruction, do group instruction, do individualized instruction. All that stuff was happening and coming in at that time. So there was just lots of turmoil and fear in teachers, because they were already working their butts off. They were already, you know, struggling, and you're going to make us learn all new things again. But I found that exciting and interesting because I was always like trying to improve. But the downside of that, and the problem I experienced in public schools, is it's never enough. There was always things continuous improvement was a thing that was coming up then too. That was a new term, and accountability became a huge term. And this was a precursor to No Child Left Behind. You know, it was sort of all this stuff was coming in that teachers and schools need to be held accountable for achievement. And I don't think that that's wrong. It was how they were doing it and how they were basically turning it into a punitive experience. If your kids aren't performing, then you must be a terrible teacher.
I mean, just to speak on some of the other positions. And so I was in the classroom for like literally a hot second, but a majority of my space within education was outside of the classroom. And so working in operations, doing the marketing, communication, working for central office, doing some recruiting for a charter school, doing in-classroom tutoring and support with teachers within the classroom. And so it's just a different variety of other positions as well. And being an educator with ADHD is like impacts you in all of those different roles, but just in different ways. And so, you know, and I've worked with related service providers that have ADHD too, and they're trying to manage writing reports and also seeing all the kids and managing their schedule and some of the challenges that come with navigating that. And also just operations. And we talked a little bit about project management and some of the challenges that can come in if you don't have effective project management tools to help manage your time and your energy. Also the culture around within the educational systems also is like, if a kid needs you, then you're supposed to be there, right? And so, which just means disrupting after disrupting.
And
the parents, exactly. So the parents and whoever, the parents and also all the other caretakers, right? So all the other caretakers that are involved in the child's life, you are supposed to be accessible for them at pretty much any given time.
Yep.
Right? That's just like the culture of the educational system. But when you tack on your ADHD to that, it sounds so good in theory,
right?
But in our hearts, and so we feel everything so deeply, right? And so like we're also more inclined to be able to give ourselves in that capacity. But then when we try to think about what actually we need to do ourselves, our work gets our ability to get our work done is negatively impacted because we are being driven as a culture, educational culture, but then also just internally, just the nature of who we are as people, are give, and not realizing how much is being taken away and how much we're not getting done, and the negative side of being able to give ourselves in that capacity within the educational system. And that's in all positions.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some negative consequences when it comes to that, like being burnt out. And I mean, you know, teachers are burnt out, right? But we feel it deeply, and we're not able to give that additional support. Like we go home and think about that.
Yeah.
And ruminate on that and stress about it.
Yeah. I mean,
and try to then.
I was just thinking about one of the most confounding pieces of negative feedback I received from a principal was that I cared too much. about the kids. I cared too much about what was going on with them. I couldn't take it home. I shouldn't be taking it home. I needed to leave it at school. You can't fix their lives at home, and you can't change their families, or you can't change. And I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do. But I would lose sleep over them. I would think about it. I would dream about them. I would worry about them. I would figure out like how I'm not helping enough. What am I, what am I missing? What else could I be doing? And
Yeah.
I never understood. I mean, I understand the message behind it, which was, having some boundaries, which,
Yeah.
as ADHDers, we generally, as I already spoke about, have trouble with, balance and work-life balance. And part of that is the emotional boundary of, yeah, where do you stop? And so that's another piece of it too that's really challenging, is to know when to leave it, how to leave it at work, which I know very few teachers who are able to do that well without, or consistently well anyway, because I mean, the best teachers, the most challenged teachers, I haven't met a teacher who doesn't really care about what those kids get, how they feel, how they are, who they are.
Right.
Like, they deeply love kids and want to do well, want to help them, want them to do well. And, with the best of intentions, haven't met, any that didn't have amazing intentions. But the challenge is there, that mixed messaging and that culture of do more, it's not enough, you need to be accessible. And so it feeds this problem with boundaries.
Right. Right.
For all of us.
Which is a challenge. So also before we got cut off, we started to talk about like what accommodations actually could be really helpful for educators. And so you had mentioned that you were able to actually get an organizer to come into the classroom to kind of help you shift and organize your classroom. That's amazing. I haven't actually heard of a teacher being able to get that type of support before. So kudos to you for fighting the good fight to be able to get that resource. But yeah, so, you can, with the accommodations process, and for those that are listening to this, the replay will be up soon. When we had a conversation about just the accommodations process in general. I had one on this past Friday. We talked about accommodations. And so just listen to that and be able to kind of piece some information together. So if you are looking for accommodations, you can also go to my website and get some more information as well. But because the accommodations process can be difficult, and not necessarily difficult, or it can be easy. So it depends on, I feel like there's just like, it's either one way. It's either hard unnecessarily or it's easy. And so it kind of just depends on, again, it depends on the organizational culture. It depends on who your HR department is. It depends on what you're asking for, how busy people are, and that can vary greatly depending on the organization that you work for, unfortunately. But asking for an organizer, asking for an ADHD coach, and asking for that additional support is really helpful. Asking for training for using project management tools, and then not just training just to be training, but also receive training in a way that you're going to be able to absorb it. So like training that's designed for people that are in the neurodiverse community. Specifically asking for training for their school leaders. You can ask for the school leaders to be trained in ADHD as well, because it's one thing to know and to realize that you need to know this information for the students that you are supporting, but you need to know it as a manager as well of people. And yesterday was Monday. Yesterday we actually hit on a little bit about why it's important for managers to fully understand ADHD. So that replay will be up as well. And so I don't want to keep you on too much longer. And I know we've had some technical challenges, but I want to thank you for coming on board and just starting this conversation about what it's like to be an educator with ADHD. And this conversation is not over, so I clearly need to come back and have a deeper dive conversation, just like really get into solutions and how to really navigate effectively as a teacher with ADHD, because I have several clients that are like, ask the same question that you asked yourself. And I heard you say, like, in this call, like, is this for me?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the right position for me? And in some cases, the answer is yes. It's just yes, and you need
Right.
some additional supports.
Absolutely.
And if you're not in a space where you're not getting the additional supports, then maybe it isn't the right space for you, right? Because like you also want to be in a organization and a culture that's going to be supporting you just as much as you're supporting them. And
Yeah.
so that's a question you have to ask yourself as an educator in the system, and not just necessarily in the classroom, but related service providers. I know HR people within the educational system that are struggling with ADHD, operations staff, some other additional support staff. And so the challenge is there, ensuring that organizations, including the educational system, are providing the necessary supports for their employees with ADHD is crucial.
Yeah.
It is crucial for not just the success of the education system, but it's crucial for the outcomes of our students that we're serving and our families.
Absolutely, absolutely, and the mental health and physical health of our educators. It takes a toll, and when you feel like you aren't being cared for, or there's an imbalance, or supported, or being seen, and especially it also is different depending on the types of ADHD, and coexisting diagnoses.
Right.
So each of us, just because we have ADHD doesn't mean that it is a good or a bad fit. Like you said, there's different, it depends on our strengths, it depends on our, other issues. I mean, there's so many myriad things. So it's not a right or wrong career for any specific person just because you have ADHD or you're neurodivergent. But it will be very important to understand your own flavor of ADHD and any other coexisting things that come up that might need to be included as far as our accommodations and or environment, and shifting to see how our strengths can be used and honored in different spaces in the education system. And I was so deeply tied to my identity as a public school elementary classroom teacher that I didn't see or even consider or have anybody support me in considering other options, in that world as well. So that's another piece that feels important to discuss as we in another conversation, or how we can support educators in finding, or people just in general with ADHD, finding their strengths and what environments they can thrive in, and what elements are making it really hard that there's not something wrong with them. They just need a different environment, or need different supports, or need different hours or structure, or any of those things.
Exactly. But thank you again for coming on today, and then navigating all these all these tech challenges.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so just a heads up for everybody else that is still watching, what's happening for the rest of the week. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about the differences between therapy and coaching. And then the next day, we're going to be talking about specific types of therapy that could be helpful for the ADHD brain, DBT and CBT types of therapy, and just some other forms. And then actually, speaking of organizers, we have an organizer coming on the live on Friday as well. That's what's happening this week. And then for the rest of the week, for the rest of the month, some additional stuff is going to be coming up. We have a nutritionist coming in. We have a marriage and family therapist coming in. We have somebody to come in to teach us how to regulate our nervous system. Just to kind of recap a little bit, we're talking about the educational system and having ADHD, and specifically talking about teachers, but I can also kind of speak on just what the experience is like for other different types of positions within the educational system, and just recognizing that it's a challenge for the ADHD in a multiple different ways. But Renee, before we got cut off, she was talking just a little bit about the challenges just being in the classroom and managing and balancing our strengths and some of our weaker executive functions in that space. And so, we're creative, but how does that work with having to implement a curriculum that's already designed, but then also evolving, but you're not but you're not a part of that evolution of process, right?
Right.
And so there's creative things happening within the curriculum. You're just not a part of it. You're just there to implement it, and like the impact that has on a creative brain within the classroom. And then dealing with the time management and like in balancing and trying to identify what's important to focus on right now, and just planning and the prioritization piece can all be, experiences that teachers can have. And I know with even some of my clients, it's a lot of sometimes it's challenge with the just project management, and like what does it look like to manage to manage projects, and to try to figure out how to do all that within the short period of time that you have within the day to do planning, right? And so, and also being in a position, you know, it impacts your health too, right? Like, are you drinking enough water during the day? Are you eating enough during the day? And not doing those things, not eating and not drinking, has drastic impacts on your ADHD. And so, like, how does, you know, there's so many aspects of like the teaching job in of itself. And then when you think about the executive functions that you need to be a successful teacher, are being negatively impacted just by the structure of the educational system.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just the matter that you had, you know, maybe 2 minutes to go to the bathroom, and you know, when you have all the work that you may be behind on because you're spending so much time and stuck in perfectionism about a lesson plan, or you get distracted when you're on the way to the copy room and to make the copies, but you grab, you know, construction paper, or you know, my principal or another teacher stops me in the hall and asks me to do something or tells me something, and then I get back to my classroom and I've forgotten it, or you know, like all that stuff. I had no idea that was I had undiagnosed ADHD at that point. Like, there were all these things that were coming up that I felt, why is this so hard? I love it, and it's killing me at the same time, because I had no life balance, like I said before, you know, was there all the time. I tried to have a social life, but then when I did that, it was the all or nothing. I was young and undiagnosed, so I would spend my weekends hanging out with my friends, and then at the last minute think, oh, I have clear lesson plans, you know, I probably should do that. And then, you know, and so it just was this cycle that just kept going, and then the not enough you know, and the education, you know, message of continuous improvement and never enough, must be better, must learn more, must, you know, try the new thing and master it, and then, you know, giving us a training and then it's no follow-up. It's like, you know, sending us to a 4-hour webinar or a 2-hour workshop and then expect us to implement it masterfully with no follow-up and no support. It just sets you up for feeling like there's something wrong with you, like that you have somehow not measuring up. And that fed into a narrative I already had because of my undiagnosed ADHD. So it was this perfect storm of tearing away my self-confidence and my self-worth one step at a time, because I was just primed for being, just feeling really insecure, and my strengths were not being highlighted or valued or used, or, you know, it made my strengths were overshadowed by my executive functioning challenges, and I didn't know that was what was going on. So that was really tricky, because then I started to feel like I'm a great teacher and I'm a terrible teacher, kind of all at the same time, because there were these really strong areas and you know, some dudes on the other side, right? And the thing that I wanted to talk about too was the balance, that the struggle many of us have with balance and overperforming and overcommitting, and trying to, again, compensate for like all those worries and fears I had. I was overcompensating by joining all kinds of committees, doing a bunch of extra trainings, going to conferences, going to workshops, joining, you know, I joined our school's care team, which was the team that helped support teachers with kids who are having challenges, and then diagnose, you know, like help them with accommodations and all the things. So I started to get more involved, which was interesting. It helped keep that spark going for me, that level, and always being there to help and learn and support. I had this instinct that I had something to offer these kids and their families that were struggling, and I didn't know yet what that was, but it was my undiagnosed ADHD and my challenges in school that I didn't recognize yet, but I somehow had this connection with these kids and their families. And so then I started doing deep dives of my own to research and go to workshops and conferences and learning about these kids that I had no idea how to help. I wasn't taught how to help these kids, and I didn't, you know, there was all these labels, and I think labels are super important, and you know, it was magical and life-changing for me to have the label of ADHD finally. But that's a hard thing for a lot of people, because there's so much misinformation and stigma attached to those labels too. So it's sort of this double-edged sword of, you can't get the support and help you need and accept or learn or figure out what you need until there's a label for many of us. But at the same time, it can be demoralizing if we don't understand it, or judgment from outside. And that was the challenge that I experienced, was the difference between how it was seen in children and how it was seen in adults. But there was still a lot of struggle with how it was seen in children. It's still like their behavior problem, they're disruptive, there's low expectations for performance and learning, and not knowing that most of these kids, I could sense that these kids were brilliant and had so much to offer. And I was also struggling with being their teacher, because I learned afterward that I was overstimulated. I was overwhelmed with all the noise in the classroom, the buzzing lights making me insane and revving up my nervous system. There were all these things. I was always on edge. I loved it, and I was drained every single day.
Every single day. So if you were to, rewind time, what do you think would have been helpful for you to support your ADHD when you were a teacher?
I think, the biggest challenge I struggle with now is even, the fact that I did get diagnosed, went to my union, went to do the accommodations process, the ADA process. I followed all the law, the things, my rights, my responsibilities, all the things in theory I was supposed to have as a teacher or as an individual with a disability, ADHD, and accommodations in that, and I learned all these things, and it was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life to try to get accommodations in a public school as a teacher. So it was rough, but without having disclosed, you can't get those supports. But I had a lot of negative consequences of asking for accommodations and disclosing my ADHD. So I don't yet know, and I can't, every situation is different, so I wouldn't necessarily say this is how anybody should do it or not do it. But in my situation, I did all the things right, and it still didn't help me be successful and didn't allow me to stay in the school system. But I do still think it was the right thing to do, to disclose my ADHD, to go to my union and ask for help, go to the employee assistance programs to get support as an employee, to get therapy and coaching, to get treatment from when I was diagnosed, to get treatment from a therapist, like having a treatment plan, having a coach. I worked with a professional organizer. All those things are, but those were all on me. I did all of that. But then when I tried to go in to get accommodations, then I was fighting to get those paid for by the school district as part of the accommodation. And I was successful in getting part of that covered. So that was really great to have the opportunity to have a professional organizer come into my classroom and help me try to set up my systems. But so the thing I would say to people is don't wait. Don't wait as long as I did. I didn't know. It wasn't like I denied it. I didn't fight it. I dove head first as soon as which many of us tend to do. The all in, when you learn about it, you become like, I've got, doctorate level knowledge within the first 2 years of having ADHD diagnosis. But it's so telling people, but carefully, like figuring out whether it's a safe environment to do so, checking in with other teachers and seeing if there's anybody else in your school that has a diagnosis, that has shared their diagnosis and gotten accommodation. How did it go for them? So I would do some kind of under the radar research before it disclosed. And if you know a district that's really supportive and really forward thinking and all these things, then targeting that to get a job, like going to a district or school specifically that is supporting teachers who are neurodivergent and have systems in place and supports in place, and know your rights too. But those are a few of the things. Working with partners, so having accountability partners or co-working. I should have pushed harder. I wish that I pushed harder to plan regularly with with a colleague. Or multiple colleagues, so that isn't too much on one, we can tend to rely too heavily on a single resource sometimes when we're struggling. And so having a team, our community, a tribe of people, a community of people, a cohort of people that can support you